Day 4 of the 2024 St. Louis Rapid Blitz saw the first day of Blitz action, with the field playing their first of 2 9-game Blitz round robins, meaning all play all. Going into the day, we had 3 leaders after the rapid portion of the tournament, including Nepomniachtchi, Alireza, Firouzja, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. But it would be Firouzja surging forward during the first day of Blitz, scoring 6.5 out of 9 to take a 1.5 lead over the field, with 17.5 out of 27. Tied for second are Nepomniachtchi and Wesley So, each with 16 points. Tomorrow the field will play another 9-game Blitz round robin, this time with reverse colors to determine the final standings. Jumping into the games, of course, there was lots of decisive moments. The players were playing Blitz after all, with a time control of 5+2. But I'll show you guys a couple of key moments from the day, starting with Firouzja. At one point, he just caught fire. He won multiple games in a row and ended up taking a pretty serious lead going into the second day. First, he got a very lucky win against Hikaru Nakamura, who blundered mate in 2 from quite a decent position. Next game, we have Firouzja here against Nodirbek Abdusattorov. Playing black, Firouzja decides to decline the repetition of moves. At this point, the players were going back and forth a bit. And here, instead of accepting a draw with queen to f6, Firouzja goes for the win with the move knight f6. And his idea is to put the knight on g4 here. Now, at this point, the players are in a full time scramble. They're down to their last seconds, and just relying on this 2-second increment. So knight to g4, things look very scary for white's king, as black is starting queen to e3 check. And this one's just a very difficult position for white to defend. Queen d2 is played, but now queen to e4. Black activates the queen, queen to e1. Already here, black could have gone for the knight endgame with takes, and knight to e5, winning a pawn. That was already good, but Firouzja plays for more. He goes knight to e3, queen to g3, and now queen b1 check, and knight e1. A tough moment for Nodirbek. He had to play king f2, which is a really hard move to play, kind of plays into black's attack here. King h2 would be losing right away after knight to f1 check, and the knight can take on g3 next. So instead he plays knight to e1, but now knight to g4. f4 was winning right away for black because the knight on e1 is hanging, but knight to g4 is still a very unpleasant position for white. He goes king to f1, defending the knight, but now queen to b4, going after the weak pawns in the position, and this is no longer holdable for white. Queen f4, nice tactic here from Firouzja. Queen takes c4 with a pseudo queen sacrifice because he wins it back after knight e3 check. Knight takes c4. Black ends up in a knight endgame, where he's already won 1 extra pawn, and he's picking up the 2nd extra pawn on a5. So Abdusattorov tries to defend this one, but it is 2 pawns up in a knight endgame, and so black is, of course, completely winning. And yeah, Firouzja's technique here was quite good. b3, white can't take this one because then you're just going into a king and pawn endgame, a pawn down. So black here just has to make sure not too many pawns come off, but eventually everything is winning. Puts the pawns on b2, a3 to fix white's king. And then very nice finish here from Firouzja. h4, knight f4, knight e3, and now knight takes g2. Just a classic shot. After knight takes g2, h3, white's knight cannot stop the h-pawn from promoting, and it's game over. So this was one of Firouzja's nice wins on the day. Another one came also at the hands of, against Nepomniachtchi. Here, Nepo, as black plays the move f5. It's already a pretty interesting position. Nepo sacrificed a pawn early on to get some activity. Definitely has some compensation here. Maybe should have played a move like king to g7. After f5, Firouzja goes for the move knight f6 check. Really interesting decision, because now takes, and white gets a very strong dark squared bishop. Now the engine actually likes black's position here after h6 with the idea king f7, where white's bishop is actually just going to have to get traded off with d4 and bishop to e5, or f4, bishop h4, but then the bishop is kind of misplaced. But instead we saw king f7 first, allowing Firouzja to rescue this bishop, which becomes ends up becoming a very, very strong piece. And this endgame, of course, is double-edged. There's mistakes from both sides, but what ultimately happens is Firouzja's bishop and rook here dominate the board. And even though black had chances, I think at this point, knight e2 here, apparently black would have been better with ideas of knight f4 check and g5 and going after white's king. But after missing this one, basically white was in control for most of this game. And in general, the rook and bishop combo is a very pleasant one to play with in the endgame. So here at this point, Firouzja is up a pawn, and he's looking to just improve his position, bringing up the king. Of course, his extra pawn is not that valuable here, but the bishop on e5 is just a very, very strong piece as it hits both sides of the board. Rook to b7 here, check, and the rook a4. At this point, it's already very difficult for black to hold it. Basically, you have to find this computer move b5. The problem for black here is if he plays rook to b4 defending the pawn, then white has ideas like bishop to d6, which hit the rook and also set up rook to e7. So this is very, very uncomfortable for black. And instead, yeah, b5 I think is possibly holding the draw. After rook takes b5, black can go knight to d4 check, and that would force this rook endgame where white has 2 pawns up, but it's not the best extra 2 pawns, and black is pretty active with the rook. So evaluation here would still be more or less unclear. In the game after rook a4, rook takes b6, this one ends up being just decisive for white as he keeps the bishop on the board. And black does get the a-pawn, but now white's rook and bishop are just way too strong. And Firouzja finds very nice resource here. Rook to e2, just pinning the knight, and this knight ends up just lost because black can't really get out of the pin. King c3, king b3 is coming. So king d7, bishop c5. Nepo tried knight e1 check, but just rook takes e1. Otherwise, white is ready to just pick up the knight immediately, in fact, and yeah, it's just game over. So big win for Firouzja, one of several wins that allowed him to take a pretty commanding lead heading into the final day. However, the player that actually had the best day of Blitz was Wesley So, who started the day a couple points behind the leaders, but ended up scoring 7 out of 9 and on today's rounds. In today's rounds, and actually is now just one of 2 players that's a point and a half behind Firouzja. One of Wesley's big wins here was against Hikaru. And this game was quite interesting. It was even for some time, but at this point, Wesley overtakes the initiative. He has a bit of a time advantage at this point as well. He finds a very nice move, queen to c6, lining up the queen and the bishop on the diagonal to look for mating ideas against white's king. So, of course, knight takes e5 here. It would be a huge blunder after queen g2 or queen h1 mate. Instead, we saw bishop takes e5 from Nakamura, but now bishop takes e5. Once again, the bishop cannot be taken, and black has managed to pick up the bishop pair, which is definitely going to be an asset in this position. Otherwise, the pressure against f3 would have been very, very uncomfortable. So white is forced to take this one, and Wesley starts playing this for a win with the bishop pair. Trades on b5, queen to d5, allowing the endgame, which definitely is a little bit unpleasant for white. And I really like how Wesley played this one. Bishop c4, he just goes king e7. He allows the trade on d5. Seems a bit odd. He allows the trade of his bishop and leaves himself with an isolated pawn. But he has a very devious plan here. Knight to b3, king to d6, and king f1. This turns out to be a losing move from Naka. The point is that now black gets this fantastic resource seat with d4. And white can take this pawn, but black's king is going to be way too active. So if knight takes d4, for example, black takes this one, goes king to d5, going for the king and pawn endgame, and this one turns out to be winning for black. Here, Wesley would have to find a very precise move, g5, probably he would, and after this, it's all over because now black's king is more active. White's king eventually has to go back, and then king c5, black can pick up this pawn with a winning endgame. So d4, really, really strong move. What Hikaru had to play was king to g2 here, and then d4 actually wouldn't be working. In fact, Hikaru would be saving the game, but this is very difficult to realize with just a couple seconds on your clock. Here, after knight takes d4, black cannot play for the same idea because white is actually doing better in the king and pawn endgame. White gets king f4. Black did not have time for g5 here. And here, in fact, it's white who's winning as black's pawns on the king side are falling apart. g6, h5, and so on. So after this mistake from white, king f1, d4, now it's very, very bad. If e takes d4, then king to d5, the king comes in. If black can go after this pawn, can take the d4 pawn as well, and will likely be up a pawn. So instead, Hikaru tried king to e2, but now king to d5, black's king activates, bishop takes d4. White cannot go for this king and pawn endgame as black is winning that. The king is too active. Instead, king f3, but bishop to e5. And from here, Wesley was able to convert this one as he's not a pawn up, but effectively he does have an extra pawn in the position as white's extra pawn on the king side is completely blockaded and doubled, whereas black has this very strong pass pawn on the queen side. So Wesley was in fact able to convert this one and finish the day very, very close to Firouzja, who is in first place. So that sets up tomorrow's final day, where we'll have the second day of Blitz with the players once again facing off against everyone else one time throughout the day. We'll have a reverse of today's pairings. And so in the first round, we're going to see Dominguez white against Firouzja, So white against Nepomniachtchi. That's definitely a huge matchup as well. And lots of other big games, MVL, Nakamura, and so on. Should be a very exciting day ahead of us, folks. Do you think Firouzja is going to be able to clinch it out and hold on to his lead, or do you think someone else will catch him and end up overtaking him in the race for the top spot? Let us know in the comment section. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.